Welcome into the SEC Preview Show on the Cornhusker Connection Network. I'm Brandon Shanahan. Today, we're talking about the SEC. Every single team, every single game throughout the entire season, we're talking about it. So that way we go into the season, no stone unturned. And at the end of the year, we'll see how I did. And then we'll make some tweaks for next year, that's for sure. But throughout the week, we're going to be going over every Power 5 conference. So every Power 5 game will be talked about right here on this channel between now and kickoff on Saturday. Week 0 getting underway. One SEC game we'll talk about for week 0. But then, like I said, every other game after that we'll also dive into as well. But before we get started, let's kind of talk about the teams and how I expect the conference to kind of shape up. So first, we'll start with Alabama. They lose a lot of elite talent like Bryce Young and Will Anderson Jr. And guess what? It doesn't matter. They had so much talent in the waiting, and the schedule does fall a little bit more in their favor than it did last year. Where they really have their Achilles heel is on the road against these big SEC schools. Really, the best team that they're going to play on the road this year is Texas A&M. So as tough as Alabama's schedule as you think it is, it's going to come down to how you think of Texas A&M. And we'll kind of dive into Texas A&M next. And they had a very disappointing, very cringy 2022 season. They lost hilariously to App State. I've never heard of their 12th man yell before, that the night before the game, but I watched that clip ahead of the App State game 25 times. It was hilarious. And they lost to a ton of other teams, 5-7. And I had a blast watching Texas A&M. I thought it was so fun. All that expectation, all that money going into Jimbo Fisher, and it just fails catastrophically. Chef's kiss. And as fun as that was, I don't think I'm going to have as much fun watching them this year. I think this will be the best Texas A&M team in the Jimbo Fisher era, and they fell victim in 5 more close losses than they benefited from. And they bring back the most experienced team in the SEC, including 10 starters on defense, 9 on offense, and it's hard to imagine them having worse quarterback play and injury luck than they did last year. They also upgrade their offensive coordinator to Bobby Petrino. I think the less day-to-day play-to-play call that you take off with Jimbo Fisher's shoulder is a huge win for anybody in Aggie land. Then LSU. I mean, I thought they were the biggest roller coaster in college football last year. Year 1 under Chip Kelly, they went 10-4. They start off with a fluky, weird loss to Florida State, got back on track, beat Alabama, huge win. They kind of fall ass backwards into the SEC championship game with 2 losses, and they couldn't even cover the 17-point spread against Georgia. And they do bring back lots of talent, including Heisman candidate Jaden Daniels, who's probably going to be the best quarterback in the SEC this year, might even be the best quarterback in the country. They bring back 7 starters on offense, and overall should be a good improved team compared to what they were last year, really be in the race in the SEC West. And now these are really the 3 teams that I think are going to really get at each other's necks for the SEC West. Ole Miss is the next best team, and I think that there's a pathway for them to make it to the SEC championship game. I do think that mostly involves with LSU, Texas A&M, and Alabama kind of tearing each other's necks off. And then Ole Miss kind of can scoot in under the radar. A lot of things would have to fall their direction for them to have any real chance. But Ole Miss should still be a really good football team. Jackson Dart was good. He should be even better this year. He's had to compete with some really good guys in that crowded quarterback room, including Spencer Sanders, who was one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch the last couple of years when healthy. And, of course, Lane Kiffin, another year getting these guys comfortable in their setup. They're going to be a really good football team. Their record might not show it just because of the division that they're in, and they may not get the praise that they probably deserve. But overall, just a fantastic football team going forward. And Arkansas will be the best team by far with whatever poor record they end up with. Pig Sooie, huge Hog fan, and I think they're in for a rough year here. They lose nearly everyone on offense outside of KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders in the backfield. And if they're going to keep up with the 32.5 points per game from a year ago, Jefferson and Sanders are really going to have to carry that load in a way that I don't expect from Arkansas, and don't expect that they'll be able to do with so many new faces on offense. And scheduling doesn't do them any favors. They spent 4 straight weeks, their first 4 in the SEC season, away from Fayetteville with 3 road games and a neutral site game. Feels like a bad time. But, woo pig suey. We'll see how the Hogs do. Huge fan of Sam Pittman. Like I said, if they end up with a 6-6 record, I think they'll by far be the best 6-6 team in the land. And then to wrap up the SEC West, Auburn, they bring back 17 starters from their 5-7 team a year ago. They're set up really well to start 3-0, get through their toughest 3 games in the SEC early, get them out of the way, hopefully get some momentum, lock up a bowl game, and then head into the Iron Bowl with their hair on fire. Even as bad as that team was last year, and I thought they were really, genuinely a bad team. Like a lot of the bad teams that we'll talk about here, like Arkansas, Ole Miss, are only going to be knocked down in stature just because of the conference that they play in. But Auburn was a bad football team last year. But even they gave Alabama a hard time in the Iron Bowl. And now we move on to the SEC East. Very top heavy, but lots of fun at the bottom of the barrel here. So Georgia, what's there to say? Again, just like Alabama, they lost a lot of players, lost their starting quarterback. It doesn't matter. But real chance that they are the first team to three-peat since Minnesota in the 1930s. And they'll be mostly untested until mid-December. I'll tell you, not to give anything away, but the games that we talk about here from Georgia's point of view, it'll be a pretty quick conversation. Tennessee, they take some small steps back on both offense and defense. And they also benefited from getting the favorable shake in a couple of close losses and close wins against Georgia and South Carolina. Really exposed them that they're not really ready to compete at that level. And I don't think this team's any different as far as what tier they're on or how they're going to elevate themselves. I do think that they're comfortable as the second spot in the East. We'll talk about their next biggest contender up next. But with all that said, Joe Milton is talented enough to cover up some of the gaps in the inexperienced offense. And if he really comes into form, like his arm talent can indicate that he can, that could really make the difference maker and turn the tide in some of the closer games that they're going to be in to keep them kind of, within spitting distance of Georgia. South Carolina, Spencer Rattler's back. He was probably the best quarterback in the country over the last couple of weeks of the season. Could definitely be the best quarterback in the division if he takes another step up. Joe Milton, obviously his next opponent in that race, but they do lose a lot of pieces on defense, and overall that team and that unit is trending downwards. And they'll likely have to be an upset specialist again this year. If they want to push Tennessee for number 2 in the East, they can do it. They show that they could pull off those big games against Clemson and Tennessee last year. But we'll see if they can keep it up, or if those are really just flukes and Spencer Rattler got fortunate. Florida should be pretty similar skilled to how they were a year ago. Graham Mertz coming in from Wisconsin should shore up any question marks they have about losing Anthony Richardson. They have the toughest schedule in the country, which will also hurt them. Only 3 true home games in conference play, which is insane. Already playing in the toughest conference in the country, and they'll likely end the season way better than what their record is likely to be. But genuine chance that they struggle to make a bowl game this year. Although after seeing how they got beat up by Oregon State last year in their bowl game, maybe not the worst thing optically for the Gators. Missouri, as we start to get towards the bottom of this conference, lots of fun players that I'm really looking forward to watching here. Quarterback Brady Cook, he had real good flashes both through the air and on the ground last year. He only comes back with 6 other starters. The defense is going to be able to get after opposing quarterbacks, and then wide receiver Darius Robinson could be a problem if he's overlooked by some of these defenses who, defensive backs who try to take the weekend off because it's Missouri. He's going to have a good year. And then Vanderbilt's probably my favorite bad team in the country. They're definitely trending in the right direction under new coach Clark Lee. Pulled off some fun wins last year against Florida and Kentucky. And in conference play, typically, they've been considered a bye week. So even picking up a couple of wins here and there, albeit in upset fashion against downward SEC East teams, a huge step forward for the Commodores. And lots to be excited about if you're in Nashville. Quarterback A.J. Swan should be really fun for the next few years as he develops. He showed some real good flashes last year. And they bring back their best weapon from a year ago in Will Shepherd. And he's shown some huge flashes. He'll be fighting for some SEC awards at the end of the year for sure. They'll need some things to fall their way, but this could be the year that they crawl out of the basement of the East, depending on how the chips fall with Missouri probably being the next likely opponents for that race. And so now, as we kind of get into the season, we're going to go week by week here. And first step is going through week 0. Like I said, only one game going on this week: Hawaii and Vanderbilt. Pretty easy one. Vanderbilt took home a really big win last year against Hawaii. I don't anticipate they'll really falter. Like I said, they're going to be better than a year ago. So I don't anticipate them really taking a huge step back. And so now, as we go to week 1, the first real slates of SEC football, top of the list, my favorite game from this slate. Florida and Utah was just a barn burner last year. It was one of my favorite games. I was really high on Florida after this game. I don't think that they can strike lightning twice. I do think that they end up losing to Utah on the road. That's a tough game. Cam Rising coming back for the Utes will certainly break down their season here in a couple of days. But man, lots of good stuff going on from Utah. Lots of kind of recycling stuff from the Gators. So I think Utah takes that next step and takes down the Gators. South Dakota and Missouri. This one's a real setup for the Tigers to pick up their first win of the year. This is going to be one that the Tigers are going to really need if they're going to compete for a bowl game here. So this is one that they got to get. They're at home opener, first week of the season. You've had all off season to prepare for these guys. They're really good in the FCS, so don't be too lenient against what South Dakota can do. FCS favorites in that subdivision, so they're going to be really good. But again, I think Missouri has just enough to get out of here comfortably with the win. Kentucky and Ball State, same thing. Won't spend too much time on it. Kentucky definitely better set up to win this game than Ball State is to pull off the upset on the road. Tennessee and Virginia, the first Power 5 versus Power 5 game of the season. Tennessee with Joe Milton making his first start of the season at home, or excuse me, in Nashville. They're playing at Nissan Stadium, but basically a home game for Tennessee. I think that they come out pretty comfortably. I'm not too worried about Tennessee. They come home with the win. Ole Miss and Mercer, don't need to spend too much time on it. Oops. Ole Miss and Mercer, don't have to spend too much time on it. Ole Miss is the victor there. Auburn, UMass, Hugh Freeze debut. Will likely see some sort of hiccups. They probably won't look the best, but they come out with the win. So does Arkansas. So does Mississippi State over Southern Louisiana. Georgia over UT Martin. Not a whole lot of analysts going into Georgia throughout the entire season. So we'll skip over them pretty quickly here. Texas A&M, New Mexico. Again, a game a year ago where I think, Texas A&M, it could be on the ropes, but they're going to look really good, and they're going to look to make a statement early on it against New Mexico. Whatever the cover is, I take Texas A&M. Vanderbilt, a real good opportunity here to pick up a win against Alabama A&M and start 2-0 on the year, which would be the start that they need. They need to pick up all the wins that they can as early as often. Alabama over Middle Tennessee. That one's pretty easy. North Carolina and South Carolina. This one's going to be in Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, so technically a neutral field game. With as good as South Carolina travels, it might actually be more 50-50. Spencer Rattler versus Drake May. Fantastic quarterback outing. I'm super excited for it. And now we'll talk more about what's on the line for North Carolina in this game when we do the ACC breakdown. But South Carolina winners of 7 in the last 9 against North Carolina. I think they pulled this out. I think it's pretty devastating for North Carolina because I think this is going to be a game that they need. They do have some playoff hopes, but this is a game that they would have to pick up in order to do so, and an opportunity to show that even if their conference schedule doesn't look great, yada yada. Now here we are, LSU and Florida State, one of my favorite games of the year last year. Just wild, wild stuff, especially for Chip Kelly's debut. I really, really like Florida State, but I think LSU is just on a different level. I think they're really going to be competing for a national championship. And as much as I love Florida State, I don't think they're quite there yet. And so that's going to wrap up week one. Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Mississippi State, Missouri, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas A&M all start off the year 1-0. Vanderbilt starts off 2-0 after their week 0 win, and Florida, the lone SEC team to not pick up a win in week one. So tough stuff for them, but things are only going to get worse for the Gators, I suppose. Should also preface, I haven't looked at all of these games yet, so I'm really just kind of going with you as we take a look at it and kind of go from there. Tennessee, another kind of non-issue kind of game here. They pick up the win against APU. This one, the next one, Vanderbilt, Wake Forest, I think is going to be a real test for the Commodores. It's going to really show their progress here because as they could make a huge step and still not look like they're playing the same sport as some of these SEC teams. But going into Wake Forest last year, 13-point dogs. I think this is an opportunity for them to show how big of a leap that they've made over this offseason. I don't think it's good enough. So I think Vanderbilt goes home with their first loss of the season and a better effort than maybe last year. Georgia gets the win over Ball State. Don't have to spend too much time there. Kentucky over Eastern Kentucky, state championship. Give it to the Wildcats. Texas A&M and Miami. I thought this was a great game last year. Granted, I thought it was a great game because I thought both teams were going to stay playing at that level and both still play at a high level. The wheels kind of fell off for both of those programs here. Texas A&M, I think it's a win, and I think they get it pretty handily, even though it's in Florida. I don't think that's going to phase them too much. Ole Miss and Tulane. Tulane's a good team, especially if you're playing Ole Miss, who might be looking ahead. I think it'll be fun for the first quarter, so I think Ole Miss ends up pulling away. Arkansas and Kent State. These are the games that Arkansas is going to need to get if they're going to stay above 500 at the end of the year. Alabama and Texas, one of the most anticipated games, probably the most anticipated game as far as non-conference games go. So I'm excited about this one. Although I don't think that it will be as good of a game as it was last year. I think Alabama pulls a win out. They have a couple of weeks to get their new, or I guess they have 1 week to get their new quarterback up to speed. They got lots of talent at the wide receiver position, a year removed from probably a couple of more inexperienced guys playing wide out than we're used to from Alabama. So I think by this point they're humming. I don't think very highly of Texas. So I think Alabama wins probably by 7 to 10 points. Sort of competitive, but at the end of the day, Alabama has it in hand. Missouri picks up the win against Middle Tennessee, easy breezy. Florida and McNeese State. Florida picks up their first win of the season. LSU and Grambling State. Give it to LSU. Pretty easy breezy there. Mississippi State gets their first Power 5 matchup of the year. Arizona kind of in a similar spot as Mississippi State in their respective conference. I think they give Mississippi State trouble, but I think Starkville across the country is going to be a real tough place for the Wildcats. I think Mississippi pulls out a win. They're going to need all the wins that they can get come bowl season. South Carolina over Furman. And then to wrap up the week 2 slate, Auburn over Cal. So now after week 2, Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Mississippi State, Missouri, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt all at 2-0. Florida 1-1 on their season through 2 games. The only SEC team with a loss in the column. I think Mississippi State could join them at the time. I wouldn't predict it. But now, as we get into some SEC games, I'm hyped. I don't think this first one's going to be very good, though. LSU picks up the win pretty handily going on the road. Missouri and Kansas State's defending Big 12 champs bring back a lot of firepower. I think they pick up the win pretty handily, and Columbia should be a fun former Big 12 matchup. Exciting game. I'm looking forward to it, but not a whole lot going on the football field. Georgia over South Carolina pretty handedly. South Florida hosting A&M or hosting Alabama at Raymond James Stadium. How do they get Alabama to go to Raymond James Stadium? South Florida here, but nonetheless, Alabama rules. Texas A&M hosts Louisiana Monroe. We go Texas A&M there pretty handedly. Florida and Tennessee, great game, great matchup, big brands. The future of the SEC East outside of Georgia, I think Florida's got a lot of juice. Tennessee, I think, is really good. I'm taking them here on the road in Gainesville. Tough loss for Florida, but I said these are the kind of games that they're going to have on a regular basis. Now we got Vanderbilt on the road against UNLV. We're not doing any UNLV schedule, so I'll give the nod to Vanderbilt's. Just the SEC nod. I think going to Vegas is tough. It'll be at Allegiant Stadium, which is pretty cool, but will be pretty empty, I'd imagine. BYU and Arkansas, I give that. Ooh, BYU now in the Big 12. I think Arkansas gets the win at home. Provo, no slouch as far as environment goes, so I don't think that's a huge factor for them. They play in front of big crowds all the time, but Arkansas, I think, desperate to pick up as many wins as possible early and often. Auburn gets the win against Samford. Kentucky and Akron, give me Kentucky. Ole Miss and Georgia Tech, give me Ole Miss. After week 3, Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and the mighty Commodores out of Vanderbilt, all 3-0. South Carolina, 2-1. Mississippi State, 2-0. Florida, 1-2, the only SEC team with a losing record. Excuse me, Mississippi State's 2-1. Sorry, I marked that down wrong. Moving on to week 4. Charlotte and Florida. Florida bounces back, gets back to 500 with a win here. Missouri and Memphis. Give me Missouri in a fight. I'll give them the edge because they're mostly home. They're playing in St. Louis, so I'll give them the nod. Kentucky takes down Vanderbilt. LSU and Arkansas, I think this is a fun one, kind of an upset radar, but I think LSU and Baton Rouge takes care of business. This is where things get tricky for Arkansas going forward. Tennessee picks up the win against UTSA pretty handedly. Texas A&M and Auburn. I think Texas A&M wins here. I think they could be on kind of a statement tour, so I think this one gets ugly. Oops, didn't mean to make Texas A&M right there. You see, I'm just so used to Texas A&M losing. I marked them down by accident. My bad. Alabama and Ole Miss. Maybe it's a bit tougher if it's in Ole Miss. I don't think Alabama has much of a problem. Could be one of those typical games where they just kind of wear you down. South Carolina and Mississippi State. South Carolina picks up the win pretty handily here. And then Georgia and University of Alabama at Birmingham. Give me the Bulldogs. All right, so through 4 weeks, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt still undefeated. And then I think the worst of the bunch, Auburn, is at 3-1. They're not in bad shape. Florida at 2-2. Same thing with Mississippi State. Mississippi State's also dropped 2 conference games already. So they're in trouble. They got some work to do. But now as we're in the thick of SEC football season, Here we go. Tennessee and South Carolina. I think Tennessee picks up the win here. South Carolina getting some of their tougher games out of the way, so that's good on them. LSU, I think, has their hands full going to Oxford, but I think they pull it out. Ole Miss reeling, not real tough slate for them going to Alabama and LSU. Texas A&M and Arkansas. Kyle Field gives Texas A&M the bump over Arkansas. And Mississippi State and Alabama. I think that one's pretty quick. I think that one doesn't even make CBS. Alabama not in trouble at all there. Georgia, I didn't even need to really look at who they were playing before I started going towards the green color here. Auburn, their victim of the week. Vanderbilt and Missouri, real tough game in Nashville. I'm still going to give the nod to Missouri, given the Commodores their first loss of the season. Vanderbilt, they're coming though, so watch out for the next few years. Florida and Kentucky, another big game to kind of determine how the East is going to shake up. I like Kentucky a lot. Give me Kentucky, especially at home. All right, so after week 5, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU. Georgia all stay undefeated. Looking good so far. Vanderbilt gets their first loss. Tennessee also undefeated. Florida with the losing record at 2-3. Mississippi State also 2-3. Not looking too good. Week 6, this is the big one, I think, in the SEC West. Alabama and Texas A&M at Kyle Field. Texas A&M so far has looked really good, undefeated, hasn't had a whole lot of struggle with their first few games. I think they pick up the win over Alabama to show that this is their year. This is a great, experienced team. They've hopefully steadied the ship at quarterback, and they give Alabama their first loss of the season. Alabama and Ole Miss. Give me the Rebels at home. Like I said, I think things get pretty bleak for Arkansas, especially as we get down the stretch here. Georgia and Kentucky. Give me Georgia. Mississippi State and Western Michigan. I think Mississippi State bounces back in that one. Give me the Bulldogs in Starkville. Auburn and Georgia. Wait a minute. All right, I'm so glad we figured that out. That was weird. Missouri and LSU. Give me LSU. Florida and Vanderbilt. Florida needs this one, and I think they know it. In Gainesville, I don't think Vanderbilt's quite ready yet. I think the gap's closing, but give me Florida here. So that wraps up week 6. A couple of the undefeated teams go down. Alabama picks up their first loss of the season. Kentucky picks up their first loss of the season. Vanderbilt 0-2 in the conference. Texas A&M cruising here going along. Florida gets back to 500. Auburn just over 500, but in trouble here moving forward. 0-2 in the conference. Moving on to week 7, Auburn, LSU. Auburn a chance to bounce back. They don't. I don't have much to add there. They don't. Florida, South Carolina. Give me Spencer Rattler. Give me the home field advantage. Sorry, Florida. And this is kind of how their season's going to go. They have their winnable games, you would think, are on the road. Then they play the teams that are just going to outclass them at home. So it just doesn't work out well schedule-wise for Florida. Texas A&M. This could be a trap game against Tennessee, coming off the high of beating Alabama at home and then having to go to Tennessee for undefeated versus undefeated matchup. My gut says Texas A&M, but the more I think about it, give me Tennessee at home to pull off the big win. They're cruising. Georgia takes care of Vanderbilt. Don't have to give them too much thought there. Kentucky and Missouri. Give me Kentucky out of that one. Missouri reeling here, kind of coming back down to reality after kind of starting the season pretty well. Arkansas and Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Tusca, see you later, says Alabama. So now after week 7, just a couple of undefeated teams now. Georgia undefeated still, LSU still undefeated, Tennessee undefeated. Before this, I did some research on these teams to kind of get myself familiar kind of with how the teams are shaping up, how they're comparing to last year and everything. And I didn't even realize that I liked Kentucky as much. They just have one loss so far on the season. Tennessee looking a lot like how they looked last year, winning the games that they're supposed to, and then picking up a big win at home against the Aggies, who I think is also going to be a really good football team. I'm excited for that game. I think that'll be great. But like I said, I think the home field advantage is the difference there. Up next, LSU picks up the non-conference game against Army. They stay undefeated. Arkansas and Mississippi State. Arkansas gets back on track against Mississippi State. Auburn and Ole Miss. Give me Ole Miss on the road. Auburn, that home field advantage is good, but I like I said at the beginning, I think Ole Miss is going to be a really good football team. So South Carolina gets it done against Missouri, and then they get to claim Columbia. Moving forward as their place of residence, Missouri has to find a new name for the city. Alabama hosting Tennessee. Tennessee coming in hot off of their big win against Texas A&M. Alabama gets revenge from a year ago. I don't think that there's any chance that they let this one slip. Tennessee picks up their first loss of the season. Alabama gets back on track. So things really starting to take an interesting path here with the SEC West. Alabama has a loss. Texas A&M has a loss. LSU still in the driver's seat, but they still have to play both of those teams. So still plenty to be determined after week 8 in the West. Georgia, as expected, they're kind of running away with the East after Tennessee's lost to Alabama, but they still got some work to clean up. They go to Gainesville the next week. I don't think it's much of a problem for them. Bulldogs going pretty handedly there. Mississippi State and Auburn. I think Auburn gets back on track with a win at home. Sorry, Mississippi State's they're struggling at the moment. Texas A&M gets off of a bye week to play South Carolina. I think typically a trap game setup, but I don't think Texas A&M has any problems with the upset specialist from Columbia, South Carolina. Tennessee and Kentucky. Tennessee coming off their first loss of the season. I think they bounce back pretty well against Kentucky. Kentucky can give them a fight. This is one that I wouldn't be shocked to see the other way for Kentucky to pull off the upset on the road, but I just don't think much happens. Ole Miss picks up a much-needed win against Vanderbilt to stay somewhat relevant in the SEC race. So now just down to 2 undefeated teams in the SEC in Georgia and LSU, both still with their toughest games of the season. Vanderbilt and Mississippi State still winless in the conference. A handful of teams sitting with just one win in the conference. Arkansas, Auburn, Florida up to this point. Missouri only has one conference win after starting off 3-0. South Carolina with just 2 conference wins. Still plenty of work to be done. Ole Miss sitting at 6-1. They're looking pretty good in the West in theory. Again, they still have, some of their toughest ball ahead of them. But in theory, still in the race here. Arkansas and Florida. I think, oh boy, this is a tough one. If it was in Fayetteville, I would definitely give it to the Hogs. I think this is a game where KJ Jefferson, the superior quarterback of the two, finds a way to win here against Florida. Tough loss against Florida, and like I said, this is one of those things where like you have your this is one that you circle as a must win for both teams, really, because you're running out of winnable games here. Vanderbilt falls to Auburn. South Carolina takes care of Jacksonville. Mississippi State and Kentucky. Mississippi State still looking for their first win in conference at home. They don't get it against Kentucky. LSU and Alabama. This is the game for possibly all the marbles in the West. Alabama at home, I think, is the deciding factor. They fall last year to LSU on the road. They struggle on the road just like any other SEC team would, minus Georgia, of course. But they get revenge here. They're on their revenge tour. They pick it up against LSU, give the Tigers their first loss in year 2 of the Chip Kelly era. Georgia takes care of Missouri pretty handedly. Ole Miss and Texas A&M, another big game to determine who's coming out of the West. Give me Ole Miss. Coming in, I was really high on the Aggies, but this feels like a dumb game for them to lose. This feels like the classic Texas A&M. They just don't bring it one night, and Ole Miss is on the other end of that. So I think Ole Miss comes out. Of course, Tennessee wins against UConn. Just the Texas A&M, such a good football team, so experienced, bringing back lots of players, new offensive coordinator. They're doing great. They beat Alabama, and they drop one that they probably are favored in against Ole Miss. So now things are getting real in the sense of bowl eligibility. A couple of teams already with 6 losses now, including Florida and Mississippi State. Vanderbilt's right there with 5 losses. They basically have to run the table here to make a bowl game. Teams that have already clinched a bowl game: Alabama, they have 8 wins. Georgia, 9-0, the lone undefeated team in the SEC now. Kentucky, LSU, both clinching bowl games with 7 wins. Ole Miss had a 7-1 record, sitting in second place in the East, or in the West, excuse me. Tennessee 7-1, Texas A&M 6-2. They're going bowling. But lots of football still to be played. But as it sits right now, Alabama, huge fans of Texas A&M losing. That's huge for them. So now they're back in control of their own destiny. If they can end up finishing up the conference with 1 loss, if they don't already have the head-to-head against Ole Miss, they're in control of their destiny there. And then Georgia running away with the SEC East. Kentucky not too far behind with a 7-2 record. Still 2 losses in conference play. They'll need some pretty big upsets here going forward. But on to week 11 here. We're getting in the thick of things. Alabama and Kentucky. Alabama picks up the win. They know what's on the line here. They're not taking anything for granted, especially Kentucky. Basically knocks Kentucky out of the SEC East race. Actually, I think it officially does, assuming that Georgia wins. Spoiler, I don't know who they're playing. They do. Auburn and Arkansas. I think Arkansas picks up the win. They're going bowling. Auburn, kind of tough spot, because that's one that you kind of circled in the calendar. Like, this is a game that we can win. To drop that on the road, Razorback Stadium's tough. I don't know what to tell you. Florida and LSU, give me the Tigers. They're still hoping for a spot in the SEC championship game. I mean, we've seen some crazy things happen with Alabama last year. Georgia picks up the win against Ole Miss. Forgot that Ole Miss got the Georgia draw out of the East. Alabama's hyped. Now they're definitely in control of their own destiny. with 2 games left. Basically, all they have to do is win one of the next two, or have LSU drop one, and then that's a wrap. Texas A&M does bounce back against Mississippi State. Mississippi State locks up a spot on the couch after the season. They're not going bowling. Tennessee picks up the win on the road against Missouri. Then South Carolina takes care of business against Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt's now in that very specific range where they need to win out. So they're going to go bowling. Spoiler, they probably don't. So their season's toast here. So things are finally starting to shape up as far as conference championship goes. Obviously, Georgia in control in the East pretty well through week 11. Alabama in really good shape. They have the head-to-head over Ole Miss. They have the head-to-head over LSU. So some kooky things would have to happen for Alabama to not be back to the SEC championship game. Other factors: Florida losing their 7th game of the season. Same thing with Mississippi State. They're not going bowling. Tennessee 8-1, so they're still knocking on the doorstep here, but their next game is going to be the one to kind of narrow things down. The East, Kentucky drops a couple in the last few weeks down to 7-3. They're out of it. Other than that, a lot of good teams. Ole Miss still 7-2. They're having a better year than I probably would have pegged them to coming into this project. But we'll get right back to it. A lot of duds here. This is kind of that soft week of the season before the last game of the year where they kind of take the week off. Texas A&M beats Abilene Christian. Alabama beats Chattanooga. They get their cupcake game out of the way before the Iron Bowl. Mississippi State gets back in the win column. That's a win for them. Arkansas gets back in the win column. Whoop-de-doo. Florida and Missouri. Florida's going to win that game. But yeah, Florida's going to win that game. I think they're just too good to drop all of these games on the road, and Columbia's tough. But I think they get the nod here. Now, here's basically the SEC East Championship: Georgia and Tennessee. I don't think it's that hard. I don't think it's that hard of a game to pick. Georgia wins probably just as handedly. They've won by double digits the last 3 meetings. I wonder if I have that in my notes. Oh, I had written it down but didn't translate it. Yeah. But big wins for Georgia over the last 3 matchups with Tennessee. No shocker. LSU picks up a win against Georgia State. Kentucky and South Carolina. Kentucky. You know what? South Carolina gets the win here. I think this is, this is where they got hot last year. Picked up a couple of big wins. They're at home. Kentucky at 7-3 coming into the game's probably a little bit aggressive. So that knocks them down a peg. Auburn picks up a win back in the win column. Picks up some momentum before the Iron Bowl. Then Ole Miss with a win over Louisiana Monroe. Shocker. SEC dominates the weekend against the group of 5 teams that they play. And so we head to the final week of the season. Big one, Iron Bowl weekend. And a lot of teams, fate pretty much sealed. It doesn't look like there's anyone really knocking on the doorstep of a bowl game. Florida's out of it. Mississippi State's out of it. Missouri's out of it. Vanderbilt's out of it. And Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn. I don't know if I have Auburn's win total right. I don't think so. So we'll see it. Georgia's in. Kentucky has 7 wins. LSU is comfortably in. Ole Miss, South Carolina. As far as the SEC race goes, Alabama's locked up the West. Even if LSU loses, Alabama has the head-to-head. So Alabama's in. Georgia's in. Then we got two-game win over 2-game lead over Tennessee plus the head-to-head. So that's all wrapped up. Alabama, Georgia, shocker, real hot take there. But final week of the season, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl. I'll give that, yeah, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, not too much of a thought there. Missouri and Arkansas. Arkansas is going to get the win here, and they end up having a better season than I probably would have expected. Now, as an Arkansas fan, I am kind of biased towards them, so there's a little bit of that. Florida and Florida State. Florida, an opportunity to play spoil to what's likely to be a very fruitful season for the Seminoles, but it's not enough. Florida State gets the win. Florida ends a tough season, only 4 wins on the campaign. Boy, that's tough. You know, if I wasn't, oh man, I think I might have given them too much of a shaft. 4 wins. Man, that's tough. 2 in conference, that's tough. I'm sorry, Florida. I apologize. Clemson and South Carolina. I think Clemson, as you'll see in the SEC or the ACC episode, I think they're back as heck. I don't think South Carolina pulls one on them again. Georgia and Georgia Tech. I hope there's no Georgia fans watching because there's not a whole lot of Georgia commentary other than they win all their games. Whoop-de-doo. Kentucky and Louisville. I think Kentucky pulls out the win. Alabama, Auburn, rivalry game, usually more competitive than you would probably expect with a team with these record discrepancies. Auburn plays them well, but I don't think Hugh Freeze knows what he's getting into quite yet. So Alabama steals one on the road and extends their winning streak against the Tigers. LSU and Texas A&M basically for second place in the West here. Texas A&M, Kyle Field. Now, you also got to imagine that LSU's playing for a playoff spot, sitting at just 1 loss on the year. They know what's at stake. I think Texas A&M spoils it. I think this is you typically drop these are kind of the teams that you see drop a game that you're like, man, if things have just gone a little bit differently, they're in the playoff. Tennessee takes care of Vanderbilt. You know, I tried to give Vanderbilt a lot of credit coming into this season, and then I end up having them with a worse record than they did last year. I think they're a better team. I just don't think that they're. I think everybody that they play is also a better team than they were a year ago. All right, so that wraps up the 2023 season for the SEC. Obviously, Alabama and Georgia in the SEC championship game. They'll be playing again in Atlanta here. And we'll do a whole postseason episode here and kind of talk about how I think those will play out, who I think makes the playoff, so on and so forth. So we'll do a postseason special once we get through all the Power 5 conferences. But here's how things shape up for the most part. Alabama wins the West. LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M all get to 10 wins. They all kind of beat up on each other for those 2 losses apiece. Outstanding stuff from those teams. The East not as strong. Georgia obviously cleaning house with the 12-0 record. Tennessee gets 10 wins. South Carolina, who I thought might be their biggest contender, they go 8-4. That's about where I would have probably pegged them more times than not. Some of the big surprises to me, Arkansas has got a lot of wins. 8-4 would be incredible for the Hogs this year. Of course, 4 of those wins come in not conference, as they only go 4-4 in conference, but I think that's plenty fine. Auburn gets back to a bowl game. That's a pretty good season for for the Tigers. Florida, I feel bad. If you had told me going into this that they would only finish with 4 wins, I probably would have been like that. That's a bit too low. Maybe 5, but I would have thought they would have gotten to a bowl game. But as the schedule kind of goes, it's just tough to find a lot of wins for them that I feel good about. And even their non-conference slate, I mean, they got Utah and Florida State. I mean, if he could, because for Florida, the path to 6 wins is 4 non-conference wins, and then as you see, they get 2 conference wins. So that ideally, with the SEC structured schedules, that ideally gets them to a bowl game. But and to credit Florida, they scheduled really good teams in Utah and Florida State, and that's the difference here. Okay, so now that I've kind of worked through that, I don't feel as bad. 4 wins is very much on the table for Florida, and if they do get to 5, it's probably against Arkansas and South Carolina. One of those 2 teams might have an off week. Probably more Arkansas than South Carolina. Texas A&M, I feel really good about being 10-2. I think they're doubling their win total from last year, but then they drop a couple of tough games after beating Alabama. So good stuff there. LSU 10-2. That almost feels too low, considering how good I think they are. I truly think that they are a national championship caliber team, but just the way that the cookie kind of crumbles, going to Kyle Field, to Tuscaloosa. Those are two games that are just so tough to give to LSU's favor. Ole Miss, tough draw. I mean, 10-2, you go undefeated against everybody but Georgia and Alabama, and it's still not good enough. So tough stuff for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels, but that is a step in the right direction. And I think they do 10 wins closes the gap, and then it kind of puts them in that same tier as LSU. Texas A&M also elevating to that tier. The SEC West is just insane this year. Missouri 4 wins, that sounds right. Vanderbilt 3 wins. I feel bad because I gave Vanderbilt so much credit at the beginning of the year, with a returning quarterback, high producing wide receiver, coaches making progress, and then they take a step back and they don't win a conference game. But it's same kind of thing where I was talking about LSU or Ole Miss against some of these other teams. It's just it's tough to see any team on the schedule and give them a win. They got Kentucky and Florida last year. I think they're taking more of a note at Vanderbilt than maybe last year. Tennessee at 10-2 feels generous. I think they take a step back, but I mean, not too far. Maybe forgot how I had the South Carolina game going. Maybe that one goes the other way. Let me see here. Who do I have winning that game? So I have Tennessee winning that game. That in Knoxville, that's such a tough place to play. I'm not making it any revisions. That's the whole point of this exercise. I go game by game and kind of gut feeling and kind of work through the logic in the moment. But I feel pretty good about this. Obviously, Georgia and Alabama isn't a hot take. That they're going to have good seasons. Definitely big upset alert for Alabama against Texas A&M in College Station. If they can get through that, I don't see anywhere else where they stumble and come away with the loss. Especially at home against LSU would probably be the next likely opponent. Maybe Ole Miss at home could give them fits, but it's so hard to beat Alabama and Tuscaloosa. LSU's probably closer to doing it than Ole Miss, but it's also tough to imagine any team other than Georgia beating Alabama 2 years in a row. So I think they're going to get Nick Saban's full effort there. But that'll do it. Every SEC game, just a breeze. I feel pretty good about these standings. And every week we'll kind of touch base about how I did at the end of the year. We'll definitely do a recap. And like I said, so we'll do the Pac-12, the Big 12, Big 10, and ACC as well this week. Those videos will be coming out. And then after all those, we'll do one big postseason episode where we talk about how the conference championships match up and who I think wins what, who I think the playoff teams are going to be solely based on this. No preconceived top four and then find a way to make the schedule work. No, we're picking every game and then see where the teams lie at the end of those at the end of this project. As always, Cornhusker Connection podcast with myself, Brooke Byrne, and Tyler Sprinkle on deck coming up here throughout the week. Make sure to tune into that. We're really diving in on Nebraska's schedule. And then, of course, pregame episodes right before the weekend to listen to in case you don't want to listen to 97-year-old Lee Corso play dress up. Exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. Bookie, Brooke, and the boys debuting here before the season starts. Also, a solely Big 12 podcast. All those details to be announced here soon. Lots of exciting stuff here on the Cornhusker Connection Network. I'm Brandon Shanahan. That's going to wrap it up for me here today. Alabama, Georgia. This felt like an easy one, but I'll take it because we got some tough ones coming up. A lot of conference battles on the radar, but that'll do it for me here today.